I'm delighted today to be joined by Greg Reed on our second episode of Unicorns and Dark Horses, Diverse Leadership Legends. Greg, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, glad to be here. Greg Reed, I'm the group CEO at Places for People, which is the UK's largest social enterprise. We've got a team of about 13,000, and we'll fill up the whole podcast if we talked about everything we did. But safe to say, it all has a social purpose, and we have no shareholder, and everything that we create as far as profits go back into the business and back into society.
Awesome. So I won't forget to introduce myself this time like I did on the first episode. So my name's Hannah Cox. I'm founder and head up Gallup Executive. So we're defying tradition and defining search, really breaking the mould in the exec senior leadership search space. And our specialist areas are operations, marketing and digital. A real pleasure to have you here, and actually this is our second podcast, isn't it? Yeah, a real pleasure, Greg, and thank you so much for your time. So this particular session will be around the importance of diversity of thought at board level in cultivating a highly engaged workforce. So clearly you are exceptionally values driven. So this is going to be a fantastically interesting session. So to start us off then, Greg, how do you define diversity of thought, especially in the context of a boardroom?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I think, it's Pride Month, and someone at work did a post about cognitive diversity, and essentially they were saying, it's not just about sort of virtue signaling and looking good, but there's an actual benefit to having diversity in your boardroom and anywhere. They were talking about the world generally, and I thought that was kind of funny to me, just because of course that's why we're doing it. That's the whole point of it. And so when you think about a business like ours, a social enterprise with businesses like leisure centers or affordable housing, you really want to have a board who actually understand those businesses, and if they've been customers, if they we've got some board members who grew up in social housing, so they understand that. We've got quite a few customers who use our leisure centers, and so when you have a discussion about things, about changes you want to do, about why you do the things you do, if you have that diversity of thought, it's really important. And I remember being involved with a group of people one time and someone pointing out that most of the people in the room had gone to Oxbridge, which was fine, but that meant that they probably didn't have much diversity of thought, and that included the women. They'll obviously have a gender point of view, but many of the ways they come about things and think about things would be the same way as the other men in the room, because they had a similar socioeconomic and educational background. So there's a lot more to diversity than just color or gender or neurodiversity. There's just also where did you live, what did you do to get there, and how are you living your life at that point in time, and are you completely, a lot of people in boardrooms are completely out of touch with their staff. I mean, completely, not just economically, but also, I've worked in companies where there's sort of a ring a bell to get into the executive corridor type thing. So there's physical barriers between people. I worked at a bank once where there was a separate elevator for the executives, so that they didn't have to mix in with everybody else. And it's crazy when you think about those things, how they could be like that. But and I've seen it many times when I try to talk to boards about our people, especially our frontline people, and what's important to them. their uniforms, how old are the vans they're using, these types of things. It's just, sometimes it goes right over the head. So you need to have the people in the room who can understand a little bit from life experience. Obviously, empathy is important, but I always think if they've been there, done that, you have an easier time sort of explaining what you're talking about.
Yeah, I personally couldn't agree more, to be honest. So is that the uniform for all of you then at Places for People, Greg? The t-shirt that you have on today? I'm just wondering.
Well, no, I mean, I do like wearing the merch, and I think that is a way for me to connect, because obviously in our leisure centers, and our staff, who are in the communities, do wear uniforms, and so I think for me to come trotting in a suit to something, I think is a bit weird if I want to connect with people. So I'm always wearing the different types of merch. This is a running shirt that I saw someone had on one day, and I do, as group CEO, it is one of my, I think, I do take advantage of that, because I will see it and I will go, oh, I need one of those. How do we? where did that come from? Let's get a medium and get it over to me.
Love that, and I mean that kind of segregation, that's not the word that I was looking for, but it works between exec and the wider organization. It's amazing actually how much that still exists. So this wasn't a Places for People leisure centre, but only last week there was a post on LinkedIn that it's somebody that was really quite perturbed in what they'd experienced at their leisure centre, and it was a parking spot right outside the door that had, I think it was either director or executive in big letters on this parking space. And the post was all about, how inappropriate that was for a start off. And surely it should be a disabled spot that's so close to the main doors of this centre.
When I worked at MBNA is where I learned they parked, the more senior you were, the further away you had to park. And it was a good lesson to learn. And then when I went to HomeServe, we introduced the same thing, and made sure that the spaces close to the building were for the frontline staff, because they had to get in and get on the phones and help the customers. And the executives and the rest of us could walk a little further. So I did those two things. I haven't really done it at Places for People because, actually, in the big offices, there's not as many people in there now. So it's a different world. That's a different story for a different podcast.
A real golden nugget there for businesses thinking about cultural transformation and having parking spaces for frontline closer and executives. I wonder how that would go down in a lot of businesses, but anyway.
I don't know. I would say at HomeServe that a couple of times I ended up being a parking attendant because I went out to make sure that everyone was following the rules. And you definitely don't want the CEO to tap on your window and go, what, are you parking in this space? You would hear all kinds of excuses. What? No. Just stop it for a second. It's like, okay. But we got there in the end. And I do think those, that might not, some people might say that's not that meaningful, but I do think, demonstrating and your behaviors are really important in sort of setting a tone. It's the same reason that even now that I manage 13,000 people, I don't have an office. I do have a meeting room I use a lot. When I'm in the different offices, I'll have, a certain spot, but when I'm not in that meeting room, it's anyone's meeting room. So, and at HomeServe, one of the best things I ever did was move out of the main office and over to the call center, and then just sit in the call center with the staff. And you learned a lot, and that's back to diversity. That's diversity of thought. So the views of the people actually taking the calls have a lot more weight in my mind than the views of maybe 3 levels up their manager telling me what's going on. Actually, I was like, oh, I already know what's going on. I talk to people doing it.
I mean, you might not think that these things, you know, are a big deal, but I believe that, you know, these, you know, these things that you just not implement, but it's your natural way of being to be really embedded, you know, within a people structure. It sends a really powerful message, and that ultimately is how you've managed to cultivate these really engaged workforces throughout your career. You know, I mean, HomeServe won lots of awards for it, you know, places for people, absolutely awesome stories to tell around people engagement, wider community, values, etc. Yeah, I'll move on to the next question, because we could probably talk about that for forevermore, couldn't we, really? But what are some barriers to cultivating a diversity of thought at the top? Is it an issue of recruitment, culture, or something else?
Yeah, I think there's it's an interesting, you know, and you see this sort of in society. There's a sometimes a backlash to, you know, when you're trying to make sure you've got a diverse set of people. You know, there's always a slight backlash. I was recruiting a very senior role at Places for People, and one of the it was a subsidiary, and it had a board, and the head of Remnom sort of gave me a hard time because I'd gone back to the agencies and said that I wanted a balanced list. That I did, you know, I did not want all middle-aged white men as the CEO of this business, and I wanted to talk to some other people. And he kind of gave me a little talk about, you know, you got to hire the best person. And I was like, I will hire the best person. I said, but when I get my list of people to talk to, and when I do my interviews, I'd like to have a balanced list of candidates. I just like to have, you know, some women, some people of color, as well as other people, and I want them all to be qualified. And you know, and I remember telling the recruiter when he told me that in that industry there weren't many women in senior positions, and I said, well, you know, I think there's 30 million women in the UK, so I'm sure you can get me 5 that are qualified to do this job. And, you know, they went away and they did it. And we ended up hiring a woman. She's been terrific. Didn't hire because she was a woman, but I couldn't have hired a woman if I didn't interview a woman. So, you know, I would have hired the most qualified candidate, you know, at the end of the day when I did those interviews, but she was the best one. But to get her in that room, it took a bit of effort by me. And so, you know, we you know, on a large scale, really work hard to hire from within our communities to you know, make sure we get bias out of recruitment, out of the interview process. But it's not easy. It is work. But then at the end of the day, you know, there is a huge benefit to it. And you know, it's I'm going to say easier for me at the top 2 layers of the company to impact change, because there's not many roles. They don't turn over. You know, when they turn over, you can, you know. But where you can make the real difference is coming in the company at the front line. You know, and if you can get the front line really balanced, and then do what we've done, which is you know, a huge management development program with 10 different levels in it. You know, you can then bring those junior managers up through the ranks, and then you'll have, you know, a more diverse senior management group. And I had a Ned tell me once something that I haven't forgotten, which was, you know, sometimes you have to do some radical intervention, and because I was, you know, explaining how we were going to, you know, recruit the right people and do the right things and all that. And she says, that's all nice and that will work. And, you know, that will take years. And I have no doubt you will do it. She's like, but also sometimes you can just, you can just do something and have some radical intervention. And so, you know, one of the things that I've been saying a lot to our staff is just being radically inclusive. And so, you know, I think it's just a mindset. And if you keep, you know, putting it out there, then you know, you will get there. And you can do like little things. Like, this is going to sound silly, but it's Pride Month, and so one of the things I do is I take selfies with pride flags in the background. So I've got quite a few of them. And the reason I do that is I've got hundreds now, is when Pride Month comes around, I'll share an inspirational quote every day, and I'll share a picture of me some weird place with a pride flag in the background. And sometimes I'm with other people, sometimes I'm not. And I just think it's just a little thing that, I think it's easy for a CEO to have his comms team put a message out for Pride Month. I think it's another thing when, I've taken the time to take hundreds of pictures and collect some really cool quotes from smarter people than me and to share them and get a little conversation going. And even that isn't that much effort, but it's a lot more effort than having your corporate comms team do it, or just sharing a generic meme or something. It's you just have to kind of really, if you want to get in and do these things, you gotta get in there and do it.
And that really encapsulates diversity of thought at board level, because that level of creativity to do those things is actually very unique. You don't generally see CEOs, doing those sorts of activities, but it really does get the results. From an employee engagement perspective, brand perception as well, and building the brand externally. The diversity and inclusion, and I'll call it a phenomenon, because I too agree that ultimately the best person should get the job. Ultimately, it's business. But I do, and this isn't an exercise to plug me in any way, shape or form, but I'm very passionate about DE&I, and I do tend to place a very high percentage of candidates that come from an underrepresented background, and I can hand on heart say that every single candidate that I place, they're top performers, and they are the people that secure the roles are the people that have performed best through the interview process, and that's why I call it a phenomenon, really. But as you say, you've got to open the door to diversity to be able to get that as an end result.
And I think if you're bringing people in, they absolutely have to be the top candidate, because other people internally are losing out on that opportunity, so they better be really good. And one of the things that I learned from my chief people officer, who's got about 10 years more life experience than me, is internal candidates, and stop looking for the perfect internal candidate and then bringing an external candidate in. And if you have that workforce at the bottom two levels that match society and match your customers and have that great diversity of thought, then if you have someone who's 80% ready for the role, put them in it. If they're in your company and they're there, go for it. Give them the chance. Take the chance on your own people. And if you've got that right level, right amount of diversity and right amount of talent then you're not really taking that much of a chance. And one of the things that we measure ourselves on are how many internal promotions do we do versus external promotions, because we do think we've got the front line diversity right, because that just naturally happens if you have the right recruitment interview process, and then trying to bring those people through. So we don't target, and I'm violently against it, because I don't want people to think people got jobs because of their gender or their race. So we don't target sort of quotas of numbers of people at levels. But what we do target is how many of our own people do we promote into our roles that we post internally, versus going out and getting another external candidate. And we think if you do the math, you flow through. And then the thing that I did, with hiring a CEO and a subsidiary, you make sure that the hiring managers do the same thing, that they have balanced panels or balanced lists. And so when you post these positions, you get 17 men and 3 women, because there are other women who've looked at the qualifications and go, actually, I don't have that experience. I haven't done that. And you've got all these men going, I'll just have a go. And so as the hiring manager, you have to actually know your people and actually go to some people who might not have put themselves forward and say, I'm not saying you're going to get the job, but you should interview for this. It'll be a good experience for you, and then I think people go, oh, really? You thinking I could do that? And, and if you know your people and you've done your right calibration, that's an easy thing to do. And it's really important to do that nudge for people to get, balanced lists in the interview process to make sure that you're interviewing the right people. And oftentimes those people are the best people. They just haven't seen themselves in that spot yet. So if you can sort of help them, and that's what obviously, off on another tangent, that's why role modeling is important, for them to see, other people who are like them in those roles. But if you don't have, plenty of role models around, you can also just go, you know what, you'd be good for that.
Yeah, part of the inclusion element of D&I, giving people the courage to step forwards, and actually that gender difference in applying for roles, men versus women, that's super interesting, and we actually cover that off in the previous podcast that we released.
I saw a study once where they tested it, and they said you had to speak French. And, over half the male candidates didn't speak French, but all the women did, so they were just sort of like, I'll wing it. It's just another language.
Anyway, let's move on to the next question. So, are there practices or habits that boards can adopt to ensure different perspectives are actually heard and valued?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've obviously sort of covered a lot about just getting the right people into the board. So that would be one of the easiest things. But then if you think about kind of the business that we're in, it's really important to get the customer voice into those settings, because that think of yourself as a customer is so important. And these sort of I got a lot of grandees kind of on boards, and sort of them imagining themselves not having the money to put food on the table is hard. It's they could be the kindest people in the world, but it's a tough thing to imagine. So if you can get the right customers involved in the process, and bring them into a lot of a lot of the discussions with the board. So our national customer group is a very powerful group in our company, and they have very clear terms of reference on how they hold me and the board to account. And every time they meet, the chairman, the three most senior Neds, me and my exec team are there meeting with them, on their agenda. And then that discussion informs both, my exec team meetings and then the board meetings. So I think there's different ways to get that voice into the discussion. And then, one of the, most common ways for me is to, to cover a specific scenario in the meeting regarding, a certain customer, which I think is important. And I just keep saying customers because, customers are a reflection of society. And if we reflect the customers properly, then we would have, the right people in the board. So, yeah, I think that's my general view on it. We to make sure that the board gets the view of what's really going on, we have 4 days a year. So that's a lot for a big board of a big organization out in the business. So out in communities with customers, in community centers, in leisure centers, in our homes, in our developments, in the offices, sort of seeing things, but not in the not in the boardroom, because you can only tell so much from the boardroom. And it's important, there's a lot of risk and compliance and things, and you have to do all that in the boardroom and read all that, but you have to actually just go out and see things as well. So I think that's when you look at housing associations and there's a customer standard now, and we're the only large one who's ever gotten a C1. And I think part of that is that voice of the customer being part of the board, and then the board understanding what this I'm trying to do, what my team's trying to do, and then, you know, the closeness of our team to customers. I think that's all sort of a big circular motion, and I'm pretty sure the inspection team had not encountered it all being as deeply embedded as they saw with us, which they were quite happy that even if things aren't perfect, and they're not, we were going to get closer to a finished product than other big housing associations, because we were so close to those customers.
I mean, that's taking Amazon's empty chair in the boardroom to, you know, to a much deeper level, isn't it? You know, truly inspiring, and, you know, the business, you deserve all of the accolades that you're getting right now. You know, I mean, people centricity has always been core to how you operate, and that's spans customer and employees, isn't it? And you know, really great insight there, Greg. Thank you. Have you ever personally experienced a moment where a unique perspective shifted the entire course of a decision or discussion?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think there are, you know, I mentioned one of our, you know, one of our NEDs said sometimes you have to do a radical intervention, you know, so I think that, you know, and that was around, you know, us, you know, pushing diversity through the company and trying to get more diverse thought. And, you know, and I think, you know, up until that point, I'd been maybe a bit stubborn in that I was kind of going to do it organically and naturally, and it was going to, you know, be this beautiful end product when I got done. And I think, you know, what Angela told me that day was actually maybe, you know, you could do a couple of other things along the way and it would be okay. You know, the difference between equality and equity, you know, that kind of thought process. And so I think, you know, we got there on that. I think as far as, you know, unique perspectives, most of the unique perspectives that have really impacted me or my team or my businesses have been customer perspectives. And they're usually not when we've done something great. They're usually when we've really let someone down, and you've got to do a lot of soul searching, and you've got to sort of you know, just examine how people you think are good people could have let someone down so badly. You know, what is the thought process that leads you to that? And, you know, we'll you know, use real customer examples. I'll tell you one. I went and saw a customer, and we had let her down for 10 years. So it was a difficult conversation. She was quite angry when I arrived. And, you know, we had a long chat. I let her have her say, you know, and then I sort of had my say. And, you know, we sort of came together and understood each other a bit. And, you know, when we left, she said, "Can I give you a hug?" And I was like, "Of course." You know, and then, you know, I know her really well now. And I decided that outside of what the ombudsman had said, that we needed to do a different financial settlement with her, which is something she wanted. And the person I asked to do it sort of pushed back from the office, you know, and I just said, why don't you just go meet this customer, and then, you know, then we'll talk about it. And he, you know, he came back and he was like, pretty much like, "Oh my God, you're right." I was like, "I know I'm right." You know, so sometimes people have to see it and feel it to understand it. You know, you can't just tell them or boss them, or, you know, they have to go out and experience the emotion, the real life, you know, impacts of something, you know, a company has done to understand, you know, that, you know, there are rules to follow and guides to follow, but then sometimes you just have to go, okay, we're going to have to do something else in this case. And one of the things that I use these examples for is to reinforce this notion that, you know, we don't always have to be right, but we have to do the right thing. and is a really big difference. And so, you see people interacting with customers who are vulnerable and in a less powerful position than this business, and all their energy is kind of used to beat the customer down and prove that we're right, that we didn't do anything wrong and we are right. And then I say to people, now what? So you're right. Like, who cares? Great. Now what are we gonna do? Like, we need to help that person. And so, this idea of doing the right thing instead of insisting on being right is really critical in a business like ours, or in any customer facing business. Being right. You think about banks and fees. Well, we're right. We charge you the fee. Okay, I'm a really loyal customer for 10 years who've never done. Is that the right thing? No, of course it's not. It's stupid. So those are the times when I think those unique perspectives. It's generally a customer. It's emotional. It's gray, and but once you experience it or feel it, then okay, there's another way to go. And for senior leaders to experience that, it's important because the staff experience it a lot. And they don't always feel, even if you tell them, empowered to do something different. They think they have to just follow the rules. And if you can demonstrate to them that it's okay to do something different, then they know they can do something different, and they know that they will have your support, which is, that's when you're really getting somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, frontline often eager to impress internally and progress careers, which can sometimes get in the way of doing the right thing. But being right itself, of course, is subjective ultimately in a lot of instances. But doing the right thing, there really is only one kind of path there, isn't there? But well, for me anyway. But I was going to ask a question. Sorry.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that a little bit. The right thing is often different for different people, but however you get there, the methods can be different. But recognizing that there's something that different that needs to be done, that's the important thing. Because if it was always the same, you could just put that in the policy. But it's not always the same. It's down to people's judgment, and some people will go further. Some people will do it themselves. Some people put some money in it. There's different ways to get to doing the right thing. It's just it's a very human thing.
Yeah, I guess that was me kind of judging a situation.
I know what you meant, so I'm not like disagreeing with your sentiment of it. I'm just saying that it's really as a leader, yeah, you really have to trust your people to do the right thing, because if it was obviously always the right thing was one thing, you could just tell them do that thing. But instead it's like, well, based on everything in the circumstance you're in that circumstance, you make a judgment and do what you think is right. And I do think if you probably put 5 people in the same spot, they would have different little versions of what they do to try to make it right. But in the end, it's better than it was before. So that's what you want.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of judging situations based on our own perceptions, aren't we? Yep. Really. So yeah, I agree. I was going to kind of take the conversation a little bit off the wall with this kind of little cheeky question here, but I won't do that. I was going to ask actually. I was going to ask actually. Well, are you a hugger, Greg? But by nature, but then I sit on the fence with regards to giving hugs. I like them. Giving them and receiving them in some instances, but not all. But anyway, I've reframed the question to.
Okay.
to be, so I don't put you on the spot so much, or at least I've reframed kind of, you know, my messaging, in that it's impressive that you've gone into a customer's home, well, that you've gone into a customer's home, first of all, as the CEO of the business, but then you've influenced an angry woman, that, you know, this pent-up anger has been built up for 10 years, and then, you know, at the end of the meeting, she wanted to hug you. That's a pretty impressive achievement, Greg, in fairness.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny because, you know, people think, you know, what is she angry about? Well, she's angry because no one's listening and no one cares, you know? So it's actually easy to listen and care. And then, you know, the hard part is, you know, what do you do then? But then it's worth it. So you do it. And I think, you know, to your question in my hugger, I think it's quite difficult for, you know, men. There's lots of times I'd like to give someone a hug, but then I think, well, hello, you know. So you know, you just kind of do it your own way. But I do, you know, I think you always just kind of judge those situations. But you know, I think generally, probably in life, if both people are open to it and you can feel it, then you know, a hug is a nice thing to do. And I think again, it's a very you know, something that's probably primal and instinctual inside us that, you know, makes you feel good, both of you, if it's something people want to happen. So then that's the difficult part. You just kind of judge your way through it and see. So I always find it quite awkward because I'm the group CEO. So a lot of times I'm shaking hands and then I see a couple other people do a little hug and I'm like, oh, I'll miss the hug chance there. But
Yeah, I mean, so this is a regular occurrence, really. You meet somebody and it's like, oh, is it a hug? Is it a handshake, or even, you know, an elbow bump? How do I go in with this, really? But thank you for asking the question. I thought of it and I thought it's a little bit wacky. I don't really want to put Greg on the spot by asking the question, but, you know, thank you for answering anyway. The last question, and this has been such a fantastically insightful session. Who is the most influential leader that you've worked with and why? And would you class them as a unicorn or a dark horse as a leader?
well, I think I always you know, talk about someone named Hugh Chater, who was my boss at MBNA a long time ago, and he was a very important person to me. He was, you know, a sponsor and a mentor and a boss, all rolled into one. And the reason he was so important to me was he was the first person who really just told me, you maybe you know, you just might be a CEO. You might be, you know, you have got the capability to do these things. And really, I hadn't envisioned that in myself. I was like any young person thinking about the next job or, you know, how to get more money for my family. You know, I wasn't thinking about being CEO of a business. And so it was a really important discussion. And he just had a way about him of making me feel confident about myself, you know, but not in a cheesy kind of way or in a fake kind of way. I think he genuinely believed in me and he let me know that. So that was really important. I think I probably have learned more about leadership from people I won't name. And a few of them are quite big characters in my life who were bad leaders. Absolutely shockingly bad, but very successful. And you sort of see it and you go, I don't want to be like that. I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not that guy. And, you know, and then trying to justify the way I lead to them when they just don't get it. They don't see the point. Why are you on a call center? Why are you in customer homes? Why are you out on vans? You know, the questions you get asked, and you're just sort of like in your head, you're thinking, we are on different planets. Like this is we're never going to meet. I'm never going to explain this to you because you just will never, you know, you can't get out of your car and run into the office fast enough. And you know, we're just different people. And so you know, you see that, and then you have other leaders who you really admire, who might have, you know, they might be workaholics, you know, and they might put tremendous pressure on people. They might be really effective, and you might have a fond, memories of working for them. But, what I took away from it was, well, even if I'm working hard, I need to make sure other people, aren't just hanging around the office because I'm there, that, they are making time for their families, for the things they feel are important. But also, if there's a time when they think they need to be working late, then great, tell them good job you, and I appreciate what you're doing. It's not going unnoticed, but what time you getting out of here? And so I think watching these bad behaviors kind of helps you sort of correlate the good behaviors. And then the last person I'll mention was our CEO at MBNA, a man named Charles Krulak, who was a commandant of the Marine Corps before that. So he retired, sort of from the Joint Chiefs of Staff in America, and having a team of 600,000, and kind of dropped into a bank in the UK as the CEO. And I remember being very arrogant and thinking, what am I going to learn from this guy? What does this guy know about banking? But really over about a 2-year period when we were with him, probably the most important things I learned about being a leader. I learned from him about being out with the staff, walking the floor, hiring good people, letting the experts do the job when there's an issue. And I tell my team this all the time: I'm really good at taking a punch. So if something goes wrong, it's fine. I'll jump right in. I'll take it. It's not a problem. I'll step in front of the team. And I saw him do that many times. And so, I went from a bit of skepticism to, totally converted to sort of his way of thinking. And then the best thing that he left for me was he was an amazing storyteller before that was a popular thing with leaders. And I think I'm a pretty good storyteller. And I think that my ability to do that and seeing how it could be effective and understanding how to do it, I got from watching him 15, 20 years ago. And so, yeah, I've been, when you're my age, you've been privileged to see lots of things, and you learn from the good and the bad. And then, you take the bits that work for you.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that if you do the right thing, if you push good out into the universe, then good comes back. But there are some successful leaders out there that have a different approach to that. But I mean. So how in my head I kind of justify it by, well, okay, what do we mean as success? Is it money? Is it job title? Or is it an element of both of those, but then what you have, which is immense respect from thousands and thousands of people that you've influenced through your career. I think that is probably harder hitting and wider spread than the other. But I mean, you mentioned something there, accountability. I in and outside of a work environment, accountability for me is one of the most important traits that anybody could be nurtured and encouraged to have from a small child right the way through their career. I mean, I don't know if you've got any to tie up our wonderful podcast, Greg. I don't know if you've got anything really to comment with regards to those two things.
No, yeah, obviously accountability is important, and I think the thing that people don't realize on accountability, and also just admitting when you make a mistake, is the quickest way through it. When I think my board at Places for People had a different kind of CEO before, and maybe at the other, they're very. I don't think they'd ever come across something like me where I just basically say, how's that going? I'm like, oh, it's terrible. It's a big mess. And you tell them, well, they don't have to like dig and pick at it and look through reports. They're kind of like, okay. And then what? People help you. Then they're like, okay, well, what can we do to help you with that? And instead of spending a half hour of them getting you to admit that something's wrong because you're trying to hide it, you just sort of tell them, this is what we're challenged with. and then the natural human nature is to help you. So I think in my life, you know, and I know that it always wasn't as easy for me to do as it is now. Just saying, okay, you're wrong, or a good idea, you know, well, I hadn't thought of it like that, like, and then just going. That's the fastest way to get from A to B, versus all the other stuff. It's really important. Yeah, I think that's really key. And then the other thing we haven't talked about that I talk about a lot about leadership is giving people the context to understand what's going on. So one of the reasons I think that I'm as successful as I am is that I do think that everyone is important, and everyone in the business needs to understand what we're trying to do, and they need to know how they fit into it. You know, and that's at every level and in every kind of job. And that requires a lot of effort by the leadership team to understand all that, to filter it down, to have the conversations, and then to create the environment where there's a lot of two-way conversations. But my whole point of doing that, people just need to know why they're doing what they're doing, and they will do a better job than if you just tell them, just do this and don't ask why. That's terrible, terrible thing to feel, terrible thing to say. But you know, and I know it happens. That's the majority of the way it's done in the work world, is you just do this, and if you do it well, you might get rewarded instead of, hey, why am I doing this? then that you just get such a better experience if you you know, it's back to the, I'm sure it didn't happen, but the John F. Kennedy sort of conversation with the janitor, where the janitor said he's helping to put a man on the moon. I'd love to think that's true. I don't know, but that is a generally that idea that everyone in the business can be tied to the strategy, to the outcome, is an important one.
Brilliant, and I think that is a really great note to end the podcast on, Greg. I mean, you know, I could keep things going. I've got things in my head that I want to drop in, but you know, we'll leave it there. As I say, it's a really great note to end on, and I can't thank you enough, Greg, for taking the time to record this with me, and that is so helpful and interesting to our audience. So you know, thanks again.
Sure. No, thanks for having me. It's always lovely speaking with you.